Hey, yeah, Ron here. Back in the scripting room again, finally. So, they say that a lie will get halfway around the world before the truth has time to get its boots on. And liberalism is never a simple thing to discuss. All of which is to say that, this will not be easy. This will not be quick. But there is great benefit to getting all the way through this. Or at least that's what I think. We're going to be talking about what liberalism is, in a philosophical sense, what the effect of liberalism is, in a practical sense, and authoritarianism. No more procrastination, let's get this started. So I want it on the record, before we start, that 90% of the information that I want to use in this part of the essay is transplanted directly from Dumpster Flower's Dark Side of Liberalism series. You should go subscribe to Dumpster Flower, you should go watch the Dark Side of Liberalism series. All of their videos are great. They're much better than whatever crap I'm putting out on a day-to-day basis, or a week-to-week basis, or a month-to-month basis at this point. So in order to explain what neoliberalism is, we first need to explain what liberalism is. And no, liberalism is not just any philosophy to the left of Augusto Pinochet. If you were to boil down the ideology of liberalism as far as you could, it would be something like this. Liberalism is concerned with the ability for the individual to advocate on their own behalf. Typically, they do this by giving the individual as many rights as it is possible for the individual to have. Liberalism initially came about as a response to the divine right of kings. Wealthy landowners did not like having to give their stuff to lazy kings, obviously. Liberalism performed this function by justifying the seizure of land by the individual, and by protecting the right of the individual to do what they want with that property. This included land and resources that were, at the time, collectively owned by native peoples around the world. Imperialism is a vital part of classical liberalism. For this reason, liberals, that is, classical liberals, tend to be opposed to civil rights. From the perspective of the rich, giving their stuff to a lazy king isn't all that much different than giving their stuff to the lazy workers. If classical liberalism was conceived of as a counterforce to the divine right of kings, then neoliberalism was conceived of as a counterforce to the overwhelming power of the government. Neoliberalism counters the government by turning the economy against it. Moneyed interests already control the means of production, but they rely on the government for certain instruction. Neoliberal ideology seeks to take control of that instruction towards the end of making the wealthy more wealthy. I feel that it needs to be stated that when neoliberal practices were first widely implemented around the world, that is the late 70s and early 80s, two government superpowers, the USSR and the United States, had brought the world to the brink of total annihilation. A case can be made that neoliberalism did immeasurable good by stopping that conflict in its tracks. But I am not going to make that case. We can understand how liberalism, and later neoliberalism, is able to do these things through the use of capitalism. By keeping tight control over the flow and sources of capital, liberalism creates what an anarchist would describe as a dual power structure, with the end goal of supplanting the primary power structure. Because liberalism uses capitalism to further its goals, we can understand that liberalism and capitalism are inseparable policies. You cannot have liberalism without capitalism, and I will argue later that you cannot have capitalism without liberalism. Liberalism, and especially neoliberalism, also championed the use of systems to run our societies. Their thinking being that while people are fallible and can have bias, systems cannot. This is another reason why capitalism is vital to liberalism, and especially neoliberalism. Power is commodified through capital. Where power once rested on the shoulders of kings and pharaohs, liberalism makes power tangible and measurable. Your wealth is how powerful you are. All that sounds nice in theory, but in practice it doesn't really work like that. While liberalism was intended to be a counterbalance to the divine right of kings, the quiet part of that statement is that it was never meant to protect people from the overwhelming power of kingship. It was meant to protect property. Similarly, while neoliberalism is meant to protect from the overwhelming power of the government, it is not meant to protect people. It is meant to protect property. Empowerment in neoliberalism does not come from simply being a human being. Empowerment in neoliberalism comes from the acquisition and hoarding of wealth, both implicitly and explicitly. This is why you cannot have capitalism without liberalism. Liberalism necessarily rests power upon the shoulders of those who have the most property. And capitalism, outside of the context of liberalism, is a shocking absurdity. As I said before, liberalism uses capitalism to create a dual power structure, with the explicit purpose of overtaking the initial power structure, kingship in the case of liberalism, and governments in the case of neoliberalism. What I didn't say, at least not explicitly, and what I will say explicitly now, is that this shift in power was meant to benefit, and was by design only meant to benefit, those who were already outrageously wealthy. Liberalism, and later neoliberalism, were either conceived of by the most affluent people in their society, or were conceived of by people working at the behest of the most affluent people in their society. By centering the rights of people around the right to own property, liberalism and later neoliberalism explicitly empowers the affluent at the expense of the impoverished. I'll repeat this for the people in the back. This is deliberate, and we can observe this in history. Every time markets are deregulated, wealth centralizes and the impoverished are made to suffer. This happened before the emergence of the USA, this happened during the Gilded Age, and it's happening again right now. With horrifying consequences. We can also observe this implicitly in societal norms and explicitly in federal law. Very straightforwardly, affluent people have more rights and more privileges than non-affluent people. And while it would be easy to make a joke about how Donald Trump is one of the least successful people in the history of Earth and has somehow managed to fail his way into the most powerful political position on Earth, even that is an oversimplification. So, better example. It would not be an exaggeration to say that the people responsible for the 2008 financial crash, that's the housing bubble, did more harm to society than literally every person who has ever sold a dime bag of weed. And yet, not one of the people responsible for nearly destroying the economy was even arrested, let alone put on trial or put in jail. And I want to stress here that this is not because they were successful. They very nearly destroyed the entire world economy. That's literally the opposite of being successful. Similarly, the fossil fuel industry is on track to be responsible for rendering most of the Earth uninhabitable for human beings. And unless your goal is to be responsible for an amount of deaths unprecedented in human history, then that is literally a failure unprecedented in all of human history. And yet, because both of these groups were able to quickly and efficiently hoard their wealth, because they made money, They have faced no legal repercussions for their actions. So far as we know, so far as history has been able to tell, they got away with it. And not only that, but the people who are the victims of these criminal actions, that is to say, people who lost their homes in the mortgage crisis, and people like the water protectors at Standing Rock, those people are being treated like criminals. And that is the other side of the coin. It isn't just that wealthy people have more rights, it's that impoverished people have less rights. There are places in this country, in the United States, where it is a crime to be homeless, where you can be punished by the law for not owning a home. And the water protectors, they were menaced, they were abused, they were vilified, and they were right. The last time I checked, the Keystone Pipeline is broken 4 times. Those people who are either protesting things that are demonstrably and evidently a threat to their well-being, or people who are literally the victims of crimes. It is those people that our society sees fit to treat like criminals. And this is for complicated reasons that I've touched on before, but what it comes down to is that in a societal sense, these people have no power. Even collectively, they have no power because the people who hoard wealth have so much power. And that leads us cleanly into... Okay, all cards on the table. I'm an anarchist, capital A anarchist. It wouldn't be inappropriate to describe me as a communist or a socialist, but I'm not going to identify myself in such a way, at least not initially. My primary concern as a person who is active in a political sphere, or in a societal sense, is dismantling unjust hierarchies. And the thing about anarchism is that it is diametrically opposed to authoritarianism. Because of my outlook, because of my philosophy, I have a pretty clear bias. So in the interest of fairness, I will say this. Authoritarianism is not automatically bad, any more than democracy is automatically bad, or monarchy is automatically bad. The quality of a hierarchy is not made out of the hierarchy itself, it's made out of the people who make up that hierarchy. And any criticisms that I have of authoritarianism are based on authoritarianism as a system. Those criticisms can be overcome by strong-willed and decent people. And anarchism also has its faults, which I will get to. And when I say that anarchism and authoritarianism are diametrically opposed, I mean this. Anarchism seeks to spread political power out to as many people as it can, whereas authoritarianism seeks to centralize power in as few hands as it can. The two philosophies are mutually exclusive. All that is to say that any criticism I have of authoritarianism is of authoritarianism as a system, as it has demonstrated itself to function over the course of centuries. Here's the thing. The big thing. The thing that I want you to take away from this video more than anything else. Neoliberalism, as I have described it, where money is power, and that power is focused in and is intended to be focused in a small number of hands, that's authoritarianism. More specifically, I think it would be appropriate to describe it as a form of capitalist authoritarianism. An important aspect of having this view is a new understanding of history, specifically the Cold War. Most historians will tell you, and maybe appropriately so, that the Cold War was an ideological battle between capitalism and communism. But with this new understanding, with this understanding that neoliberalism is authoritarian, we can be more specific. The Cold War was a battle between authoritarian communism and authoritarian capitalism. And the capitalists won. Now, don't get the wrong idea. I'm not here to tell you how great the USSR was. It wasn't. Stalin was a monster, and his crimes were arguably worse than Hitler's. Having said that, and while the crimes of the USSR were inarguably monstrous, authoritarian capitalism is poised to be responsible for a number of deaths unprecedented in all of human history. Let's not lose sight of that. Depending on your political persuasion, this can also help you argue against the status quo. Being able to argue that the problems that our society faces are not a result of unchecked capitalism, but of unchecked authoritarianism, will get more people on board for the cause. And hey, you don't have to tell those people that the authoritarianism and the capitalism are the same thing. You can leave that out. You have my permission to leave it out. Let them come to that conclusion on their own. It's fine. It's fine. This also circumvents a larger problem that I've seen people have with the left. That we don't stand for anything. That we only stand against things. So again, capital A anarchist, bring down all the unjust hierarchies, but I'm not convinced that that means I need to be against authoritarianism. Although, to be clear, I am very much opposed to authoritarianism. Not the point. The point is, if one were to argue in favor of anarchism, then they would also necessarily be arguing against authoritarianism, because the two positions are the same. Or even better, a person could incidentally argue against authoritarianism, and then argue for anarchism. And that last point is key. That thing I just mentioned, where you make an argument almost incidentally, the right has been doing that for a long time, and that's how they've gotten people on their side. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that the left needs to make better arguments. That video is a long way off. What I am going to tell you is that saying something is bad isn't necessarily enough to make someone convinced that it is bad. You also need to provide an alternative. You need to point someone in a different direction. And ultimately, that's the thing. People know that capitalism is the problem. People know capitalism is the problem because people know when they're being fooled. They know when they're being taken advantage of, and generally they know who's doing it. The thing is that people just don't have any other options. They don't have anywhere else to go. I've said before that it's our responsibility on the left to show people a different way. But I don't think I've explained why that is. Maybe we should do that. Maybe we should do that. Can you tell that this was recorded over, like, a week? Hey, editing Ron here. I'm very tired. So, I think I've decided that I do better with general outlines than I do with full scripts. The full scripts, well, you see it in the video yourself. The difference is literally shocking. I've been writing since I was writing things as a hobby since I was 8, maybe. But with a full script, it's much more difficult to perform. And I thought that, being performative didn't... I'm not a naturally performative person, so I wasn't sure that having that aspect of the video made the video better. But watching the first and the second parts, and then watching the third part, which the first and the second part had very full scripts. Every line was recited verbatim, whereas the third part had a general outline. The difference is shocking. So, moving forward, I think I'm going to stick with outlines outside of certain specific circumstances. I'm sincerely sorry that this took so long. My life has been a wreck recently. Everyone in my family has had some kind of misfortune fall upon them, and even my friends have had misfortune fall upon them, and I'm not the kind of person who can just ignore that, so I've been taking care of them first. I would hope that the audience that I have, the audience whom I have been trying to appeal to, would understand that, and I'm sure that you do, but I also understand that as someone who makes content, I have a responsibility to you people, you wonderful people. Speaking of you wonderful people, between saving up money that has been sent to me through Ko-Fi, again, thank you very much, and a gift that I received from my sister, I was able to get a second monitor. This is a new monitor. The old one is right here. You can't tell, but the Inquisition's on there, because I'm going to watch that as soon as I'm done recording this. So that is going to have a handful of effects. The big thing is that between having a decent mic, decent headphones, really good, actually, webcam, and 2 different monitors so I can monitor chat and do a thing, I'm going to be able to do streaming, potentially. That's something I'm going to experiment with. And that's something that I'll have to talk about in the update video or the yearly review video. That's still a thing that I want to do. So, yeah, gotta get to work on that too. A very gentle reminder, I still do have a Ko-Fi. If you found this video to be insightful or valuable or even entertaining, feel free to send me money. Don't feel obligated to send me money. All of these videos are a labor of love. I do these things because they are important to me. But, as I've said before, disaster keeps falling upon people. I've had 3 relatives in the last 2 months get into car accidents. It's fucking uncanny. Anything that you're willing to part with is a great help to me, and helps me keep this set running, and even improve it by small amounts. I also have a Curious Cat, if you want to ask me questions anonymously, which I'm to understand that's what that's mostly for. Abusive comments are going to get deleted most of the time, unless there's a point I want to make at the expense of the person being shitty. I also have a Twitter, if you want to go over and talk to me there, but I don't take Twitter very seriously. Twitter is not a platform you should take seriously. Or if you want, you could leave a comment on the video. I do go out of my way to read every single comment. He's Swixy. He's my kitty. So that's everything I have to say. I'm all said out. Next video is either going to be a year-end review of the entire channel, or a video about how neoliberalism is at least partially at fault for fascist violence. I'm probably going to do the year-end review thing. I need some cheering up. So yeah. Until we get there, take care of yourselves, alright?